This is Dave the Gardener on Actual Radio.
Hi and welcome to another Gardening Tips of the Month, and it's November already, and the weather forecasters are saying we could be in for a very cold month. Well, there's big jobs to be done, and I call November the big clean-up month. You've had it pretty easy, the weather's been mild and it's not been too bad. But now, of course, as November gets on, all the leaves are falling now. One of the big jobs in the garden really is actually getting rid of all those old leaves. It's a thing people tend to forget. When it gets cold, you tend to close the door, put the heating on and forget the garden. Big mistake. Because once all those leaves start tumbling down, laying all over the lawn, if you leave them on the lawn, it causes a lot of problems. Because you end up, if you leave a pile of leaves on the lawn, big yellow patches where the grass could rot off and give you a fungus infection, which can be a problem to try and resolve. So one of the jobs you need to do is get out there on a nice day, rake up all those old leaves, not only on the lawn, get them off the flower beds, because you know what, you could have planted out all your little spring flowers and then they get covered in leaves, starves them of the light because the leaves are on top of them, and then they die off too. So you shouldn't leave any leaves lying around the garden at all. And they're great for composting. You can pack up all the leaves, put them in a sack and put them on the compost. They soon rot down, and then dig them in the spring, and they're excellent. And if you've got a lawn, a pond, make sure that you cover the pond with a netting, because if the leaves fall in the pond, and I've said before, they can cause major problems, because the leaves eventually will sink to the bottom of the pond and they give off a gas which could end up killing all your fish in your pond. So get that net off. If you haven't got a net, make sure you take those leaves floating on the lawn pond straight away. Now, in the old flower borders, without sounding like a repeat advert, this is the last chance this month to put any spring bedding and bulbs in. So the first thing you need to do is get rid of all that old summer bedding. Pull out all them old geraniums and begonias into the compost bin with them. If you want to save your geraniums, okay, they can go into the greenhouse, but they need to be cleared away now. It's no good thinking about putting in spring bedding if you can find it right at the end of November. It's far too late. So that's the job we need to be done now. And of course, you can also put in things like winter flowering pansies, wallflowers, violas. There's still some around. Garden centres are running short, so it's a job you need to be done over the next couple of weeks. And also the last chance to get them bulbs in. If you love spring bulbs like daffodils and tulips, you've got to get them in. It's no good. I know in February the garden centres are selling them at half price, but they're no good then. It's too late. So get them in now, and you'll probably find in some of the garden centres and nurseries that they are selling them off a lot cheaper now. So you could get a real good bargain if you go down there. The other thing is what people have had a great success with this year has been dahlias and tuberous begonias. They've been brilliant, and there's still a bit of flower on them now, but now's also the time to think about, well, they've done me a good job. I'm going to dig them up and overwinter them, and then you can have them for next year. So the first thing to do is when you dig them up, cut them down, cut all the stems off of them, shake all the old soil off, leave them out on some newspaper, whether it's in the garage or somewhere, for a day to dry out in case there's some moisture in those tubers. And then once you've actually dried them out, you can then put them in some compost in a garage or a garden shed for the winter, but it's got to be frost free. Now, if like me, you've got lots of containers on the patio or on the decking, and you've got plants which spend all their life in those containers, there's one or two little things you need to think about. Your containers need to be raised off the ground. The reason for that, if you get a wet winter, those containers could become waterlogged because the water can't get out through the bottom. You can buy these little feet from the garden centres now, pot feet, and it just raises the pots off the ground so that the water will drain through them and not stay inside the pot, which you don't want in the winter time. And if, like me, you've also got some plants which are really nice and they're fairly tender, I always put them up the side of the wall of the house because I haven't got room anywhere else to put them. But one of the things I always do is cover the pots in bubble wrap. This is this bubble polythene. Wrap around the pot. Now, the reason you wrap it around the pot is because most plants die off in the freezing winter because the frost gets into the pot and kills off the roots. And it's the roots what get killed, not the top plant. So that's a very important thing to remember. And if you think, well, I've got a veg plot and I've got an area of land which I need to be dug over this winter, when's the best time to do it? Well, November is a brilliant time to do any digging. And if you're like everybody else in Essex, got a horrible clayey old soil, don't think like a lot of people do. Break their back, dig it over and then chop it up into little bits. Forget all that. Let the frost do the work. Let the frost and the weather do the hard work. You just turn it over, leave it in big lumps, and then the frost will get into it and break it down, and that soil will be absolutely lovely in the spring. Then you can work some compost into that soil and keep it nice and light. Because that's what happens when people tend to think they've got to chop it all up. Don't do it. Big mistake. Leave it in big great lumps. Now, November is also a perfect time of the year to plant trees and shrubs. Now, the trees and shrubs I'm going to talk about are what we call deciduous trees and shrubs. Now, that is plants which drop all its leaves for the winter time and then go dormant. But that's trees, any trees, shrubs you like a look of. This time of the year, through November, you can buy them very, very cheaply, what we call bare root. You can get them from nurseries, you can get them off the internet, they're very cheap, they come through and they're about half the price which you would buy if they was container grown. And you can plant them between November and March very successfully. If you buy them off the internet and they come through the post, the best thing to do is put them in a bucket of water for a few hours to soak so they probably might have dried out a little bit as they come through the post, and then plant them, put plenty of compost around the soil, and you'd be amazed at how well they'll grow. And then finally, 1 or 2 more jobs to do. If you've got fruit trees like apples and pears, just remember to put a grease band around the trunk. This will stop the old winter moth crawling up in the winter and laying the eggs, which can do an awful lot of damage. And just prune your roses back by half their size just to stop the wind blowing them over in the spring. It causes what we call root rot, and that can cause damage to the roots. And finally, gardeners' number one friends in the garden are your birds. You know what? The birds you see in your garden eat thousands of pests every day, keeping your plants nice and healthy, but they struggle through the winter months. So bird feeders are ideal, and the best food to give them: sunflower hearts, fat balls, peanuts and birdseed. But use no mess, because a lot of people say to me they use birdseed which they buy cheaper and it falls on the ground and then it all starts growing. And that's because it's got all sorts of things in it. But if you use one called No Mess, you won't get any of this sprouting up in your garden. And finally, never put any birdseed on the ground, because all this does is put your birds at risk from cats. Well, that's it. A few jobs for the November, and I'll see you here next month. Cheerio.
Email your gardening questions to Dave the Gardener at actualradio.com.